of staying joined by Satish Gaikwad from Luminar Technologies, and we're going to be discussing the shared responsibility model and how it relates to infrastructure and the challenges that come along with it. So that was actually pretty quick, 20 seconds. So let me go ahead and introduce Satish and see if he wants to tell us more about where he works or what he's working on or anything of interest right before we get into the subject. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
What do you work on mostly at Luminar? We'll start there.
I'm working for I'm building the infrastructure for Luminar, taking care of all the initiatives related to infrastructure, and it has been an amazing journey so far.
So you're experienced in the topic we're going to be talking about today. So working with infrastructure in different teams and like providing stuff to different people. All right, so let's go ahead and get started then with the first question. So I'll say, what is the shared responsibility model between like DevOps, SREs, and engineering? So how would you define it, and then like what exactly is it?
I'm gonna read out that to you. It's a definition, simple. There are many definitions, but when it comes to specific to infrastructure, I think it's just simple agreement between both of these teams, SRE teams and the engineering teams of who owns what, and make sure that everything is defined and outlined clearly. And it involves not only infrastructure but the applications as well, the entire life cycle of applications. And in other words, for technical people, it's like you build it, you run it kind of model, which helps inside a team to work efficiently and at the same time not be bogged down by too many responsibilities. So that's what shared responsibility means to me when it comes to infrastructure.
Awesome. So why does that matter, and how important is that in actually getting stuff done, right? Like, and making sure things run smoothly between teams.
Yeah. So I think to understand that better, we have to think about the shared goals and vision, and the between multiple teams, not just the engineering teams and DevOps teams, but the organization level as well. So organization have certain visions when it comes to infrastructure. They have some goals to achieve, and some of that I can list here is the security first. Every organization and leadership is worried about security, how we are actually deploying stuff. Is it secure? What about the security scanning and whatnot, right? And then is it going to be cost effective? Is it going to be how do we manage change management to the infrastructure as well as the applications deployed on those infrastructures, services. And yeah, the other thing that is reliability and stability. So how do we make sure everything is reliable and stable? So these are all shared goals, vision by all these teams, IT, security team, the leadership, and DevOps and engineering teams. Another part is risk management. How do we manage the risks? They want to leadership want to measure the risks associated with infrastructure and the applications deployed. And not necessarily all teams would really worry about those things, but if you look at all of these teams are responsible for all of these aspects. And
So when you're listening
how
to
do we
teams too,
achieve?
which teams are you talking about, like, specifically? So
So specifically, I'm talking about the security teams, IT teams, engineering teams, DevOps teams, and on top of that, of course, the leadership teams. So all of them are looking at the all of these aspects. When it comes to security, every team is responsible for it. When it comes to application, engineers need to write the code that is secure. They need to make sure they are deploying it securely.
okay, so
The infrastructure
engineering
where
team,
it
you're meaning
runs.
like software developers and stuff, right? Like, so we're talking about
Yes,
devs, junior to senior to principal, like, and everything in between, right?
yes, right. So it matters. It matters a lot because shared responsibility model allows them, all of these teams, to work as a one unified team and tackle all these challenges. And the framework allows them. The shared responsibility model framework allows them to own the pieces of it and not always constantly think about who owns what. And then implementation and reaching the common goal makes it easier. So that's why it matters a lot. Shared responsibility model makes these efforts seem quite easy. But it has to be successful and it needs to be done in a particular manner. So of course, a lot of things needs to go into consideration about how do we implement, execute, and achieve the shared responsibility model and make it successful.
I think that goes into the next question. What are some of the challenges then of like getting started with it or achieving it, right? Like how do you achieve that? Like say you come into a company brand new and they're not really working together that well. Like what's one of the first things you do? And like how do you start working on it?
So it is actually difficult to generalize it. Um, it is totally different situation everywhere. Every company will have different challenges to get started. Thinking about how do we implement that shared responsibility model. I think first thing that matters most is the ability of judging and understanding, what work culture is and what works best to make some progress with it. So that is the first thing, and then identifying the stakeholders across all these teams. So I'm going to just scope it down to two particular teams right now. DevOps team or SRE teams and the engineering teams. Of course, I'll talk a little bit about security teams and IT teams as well. But most of the things are more important for this particular topic. I think it's going to be engineering teams and the SRE teams. So identifying the important stakeholders in all of the groups within the engineering team, based on what how big the organization is, and then identifying the stakeholders in the security team as well as the IT team is also important. And knowing who those stakeholders are, the decision makers, the people, or you can call them as champions who would actually understand the benefits of shared responsibility model, or at least you can go and talk to them and do it. So I think that makes it very important to identify who those stakeholders are. The third thing I think is about assessing the awareness level, and that can vary. You will find engineering teams not aware of what shared responsibility model is at all. They have been managing the infrastructure, their applications on their own, and working in silo maybe. So there you'll find more awareness issues, and I think that would be a challenge. So I think you want to assess the awareness levels as well, and based on that, then you know what steps you want to take as first steps.
So you come in day one and you got a bunch of software developers yelling at infrastructure engineers saying, "Hey, this ran on my laptop fine. It ran in staging, but now in production, it's not working. What's going on?" Right? Like, and just blaming it on them without understanding, like, oh, maybe there's different resource limitations in production versus this, and like we didn't figure out like what's going on. So I guess you have a lot of yelling back and forth saying that, hey, you should understand how production works, and they're like, well, I don't understand that. It works in staging. So like, you just kind of get them to talk to each other first, or is it talking to each other kind of like maybe make things a little bit worse in the beginning? Like, or do you kind of get each team to set rules? And
it depends actually. It totally depends how it goes, but the end goal is it always comes to the point where there's learning. Either problem gets solved quick, or there's learning. Hey, I think we have some challenge here, understanding and knowing who is the owner of particular thing, who is going to respond to things. And that's what shared responsibility model is about. It is an agreement, understanding clearly who owns what, so that when some incident happens or something needs to be done, people are aware where to go, who to talk to. The escalation matrix, for example, which is part of the shared responsibility model.
it's not just submitting a Jira ticket and just waiting for some random person to come in and fix it for you, and then you don't know them and they're just faceless. Or
That's pretty much usually happens when there is no awareness, and that is an indication, or the symptom that there is not everything right with the shared responsibility model. People are not aware, and that's what actually I would specifically look for. These kind of incidents, what is their experience, what they have to say on this one, and that gives a lot of information and knowledge about what is missing with the shared responsibility model.
gotcha. All right. So we kind of talked about, what happens when you start out new.
I need to finish on that as well.
Okay, good.
So after assessing the awareness level, of course, you gotta start working on the plan and vision. That includes the making people aware of what shared responsibility model is, and try and understand what kind of current ongoing issues are, and then draft a kind of vision plan. How we can achieve in the short term and the long term. And to make all of this successful, of course, you have to take the leadership support. You have to talk to them, make them aware. Most of the time, they see the problems, but not necessarily they are aware that all of these problems are happening because of the shared responsibility model not being existent, non-existent shared responsibility model.
So what does that
And
what does that look like
yeah,
in a smaller, like, so you got different group sizes, right? Like a small group, like you can just kind of get everybody in the same room, right? Like, and maybe kind of
yes,
talk about it. Like what happens when you get to like a bigger group? Like maybe you've got 50 to
it's a
100 and
challenge.
everyone's remote. Like, do you get everybody in like a same, like, Zoom or something like that? Or like, do you kind of just talk to like the heads of the team? Like, what does that really look like in action?
Yeah, so it is totally different, approach. And when it comes to small companies, it's pretty easy, straightforward, because you have, people, you can get them in one room and talk about it, and you're done in one day. You just, identify, you highlighted, what is missing. Everybody agrees to it. You have a discussion and make sure that everybody agrees to it, and then you can go towards, planning. But a bigger organization, it's not going to happen in one day. You have to make those connections. And that's why identifying stakeholders is important. You identify stakeholders, make sure they understand what you're talking about, make sure they share the same goals with you when it comes to solving the problems. And I think the best thing that works for me is I jump onto the problems that they are going through, what the current problems are, and then I look for those opportunities where I can talk more about the problem and the little bit of solutioning part of it. So that kind of gets them, get interested and understand that, hey, there's some value add here, if we continue talking. So that's how I engage and get those stakeholders from all the teams, and possibly at the all levels, basically. And once you have the necessary knowledge and understanding, I think that really goes well, and you can start making progress. So yes, bigger organizations, it will take time, but there is a way how you can achieve it. Of course, you just cannot go and start implementing things. Of course.
So say, which side have you had more experience on, the DevOps SRE side or the software engineering side? And like, have you had experience on both, or?
Yes, both. I was fortunate enough to be part of all these teams and understand all those problems very closely, and that enabled me to think through what really shared responsibility model is and how successfully we can achieve it. And yeah, I can talk about those experiences, and I guess
Yeah, let's do
I'll
it.
be spending a lot of time. Yeah, yeah.
Let's go into a couple of them if you want. Like, what's your favorite one? I guess we can start with, or your most memorable.
Um, Of course, I cannot talk about specific experience, but I can talk in general, interesting stories, how I realize. So I think I'll begin with um, the I had totally different understanding of what shared responsibility model was. It was more like central with more control um, and less of autonomy on our engineering side, and I never understood early on that to make sure shared responsibility works well, you have to have the right balance of autonomy and the control. Autonomy here meaning allowing engineering teams to manage their own infrastructure or services without interfering too much, being on the DevOps side. So this is me being on IT teams side and DevOps SRE side most of my career. So what was missing was not knowing what kind of pains they go through, why actually shared responsibility model is so hard to implement and achieve, why there is
So you're
so much of
talking.
resistance from the engineering teams.
I had a question. So you're talking kind of like going from like a ticketing model, which is like, oh, the SRE DevOps do everything, and you just submit a ticket, to like more of a like GitOps model or something like that, where there's understanding where they just push something and it starts working for them, right?
Yes, yes. So these are new ways of how to implement those shared responsibility models, with the tools. Of course, we're not going to talk a lot about the tools, but more of, I think modern tools really help us, achieve this, much easier way, and make it more comfortable experience for engineering teams, and reduce that resistance a bit, because and that's where the choice of tooling also makes sense, and everything. And there's a lot to talk about that as well. I have had very interesting experiences, which allowed me to be really good at when it comes to making choices of technologies, and how to get engineering team ready for the changes, and accept the agreement.
So did you ever run into, so we're talking about past stories, did you ever run into a scenario where you expected the software development team to understand certain topics or understand certain like levels of systems or even networking, and they didn't, and they submitted something to get it working, and then you had to work on it and fix it and then try to, hey, I got to teach you something, right? Like, is there a resistance to learning new things in software development? Should you make it easier for them or make it like give them more control, make it harder?
Oh, that is my favorite one. I think it is tough. It is very tough making people learn something new because um, the introduction is the learnings are important, but not necessarily engineering teams will see it that way. When it comes to understanding infrastructure learning, one thing I have realized is that all of these issues are, the challenges are secondary to engineering challenge, and it makes sense because engineering teams needs to focus on what they care for the most. Their product, what they are doing. They should not be bothered about how it is going to run on the infrastructure. They would very well like to have someone else doing that job for them, and that's how the expectations problem begins with. And these central teams cannot really fulfill all of their needs, and we need to figure out a way through the technologies, how can we reduce the learning curve for the engineering teams drastically and make it extremely easy for them to take care of the shared responsibility model, their side of the shared responsibility model.
So without going into tools too much, have containers made that a little bit easier compared to like
Oh
virtual
yeah,
machines and like bare metal? Like,
absolutely, absolutely. That is one thing. Making it a containerized approach for everything definitely makes it very easy for engineers. But I think we have been living with containers for quite a while now, and we have many other challenges. So we have reached one level. Now we have level 2 set of challenges, and that's where everybody's trying to make it even better, even faster, and it's going to continue, I guess. And then all these new technologies that we hear about, the ways of doing, GitOps is one example, using GitOps for literally everything. That is also making things even more faster for engineering teams. And how do we make them not learn many things? I can talk about multiple examples with the tooling also, if that
if you
makes
want,
sense.
I think we got time. If there's anything interesting that you want to talk about in that, without getting too deep, but I think some of the tech people will be like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So before I talk about this some example with the tools, I think I want to talk about the success criteria. So
Gotcha.
I mentioned about the uh, how I started understanding about the shared responsibility model, how I measured. I always knew that there is something missing, there is something not working because it was far difficult to achieve the shared responsibility model and get engineering team to agree on something. Um, so um, what happened, what changed is the success criteria, basically, how I measure my success of shared responsibility model. So I had totally different success criteria. I was more focused on what organization need and not what engineering teams need. So, or what they were looking for really, to contribute on their part. So,
Do you have an example of that? Like
uh,
maybe like we need to develop this thing quickly. We need to get this done. Like I don't care what you do, just make it work. Make it so that they can test and update.
yes, and then there is typical response. My response, back in old days would be, hey, here is the documentation, here is the example, get started with this, you build this up, and then, let me know if you need any help. And we will help you, get it deployed, because that's the part, we control and we are responsible. And what happens next is, they come back and saying, hey, I don't know how to do these things. I have never done this before. Can I get some help there? And then, oh, I'm just bogged down by many other things which are more important. I think you could read up about this particular technology and do it because you're an engineer. That's how it used to be.
They asked for
Um,
help. You gave them homework.
Yes, exactly. So that part was not easy to understand at that time. It almost, it's like you accept it that that is the way how it needs to be. So what I was doing essentially was expecting engineering teams to understand about the infrastructure, understand how they need to work in that environment, and be able to contribute. And that was making them, go away. and not agree for
Yeah.
it.
So you've
And
like written
that
all
was,
this. Sorry, you've
yeah,
written all this documentation basically for your team, and you're handing it off to them, and it's not in a way that they can easily understand it. But you put all this work in, so you still want to share it. And be like, oh, hey, look, I've done all this work to do this, and then at the end, it's like it's not what they needed, right? Like,
right. So that was the old ways of how to measure. And then, of course, if you look here, this one example is pretty easy, right? Easy to understand. What is the success criteria here? I mean, what is the success rate here with shared response model? You will see that they are handicapped right from the day one. So their ability to hold on to their end of shared responsibility model was always weak because they are not independent. So that was the failure. However, that was not considered as failure based on my success criteria that I used to use before. And then all of that changed. All of that
so what's
changed with
so I
the
say level
experience
two.
where, yeah, yeah. So all of that changed when I had an opportunity to join engineering team directly and work with them very closely, being outside of DevOps and SRE team. And I started to see all those problems from their lenses when I was interacting with the DevOps and SRE team. So that opened my eyes and started the process internally to rethink entire shared responsibility model.
So you
And
sent an
it needs to
email,
be
and you
more
got an
centered.
email back
Yeah.
saying, "Here, go read these docs," and you're like, "That's not what I need." So you got to see the other side of, oh, this isn't like it felt helpful when you were sending it
Yeah.
from DevOps and SRE because it's like, hey, this is all you need to know, but it wasn't
The,
because it's
it,
still
it,
missing
it, it,
some.
Yeah, so it was a little bit slightly different experience, but I could imagine, what would happen to engineers. Me being, part of, SRE and DevOps team in the past, it was not a challenge for me. But being on engineering side, it allowed me to see through what challenges engineers face because I was easily accessible to them. So they would come to me for literally everything. Um, and on the other hand, and DevOps and SRE teams, whatever they were doing, of course they were not doing anything wrong. They were just bogged down by so many things. And what I was doing, what I do all the time, I disrupt. I come and actually bring a lot of changes that makes people uncomfortable, and for good, of course. And I started, suggesting those new ways of doing things, and that made DevOps SRE teams, really uncomfortable. Mainly because they were just bogged down by so much of work already, and they had no cycles to work on those. And that's where I started feeling the pain. Okay, I cannot make those changes that I see clearly will help engineering team, and that's when I realized what I was essentially doing is improving the shared responsibility model.
So
And
how
then
do you break
that
through
set off.
that? Like, so how do you break through and get the stakeholders to understand that they need to take time to actually set that up, right? Because the idea is like, what I guess set the goals, like you're saying first, right? Like set goals and like what you actually want to do, and be like, well, to get there, we have to break down what's going on, right? Like we got to stop for a little bit. Maybe we're not going to get that new feature out, but we need to get this working so that we can go a little bit faster after. Or what do you just find the stakeholders, right?
Yeah, just find the stakeholders, continue making progress, and that's the way to go. I think that's the only way I have seen working really well, because um, any top-down approach doesn't work. You just have to go at and something, and I think it is. Every company will have different challenges, and after me learning all those newfound ways of thinking about shared responsibility model, I totally changed, and then now I have rethink over what that model is and how to implement it. So for me today, engineering team is first. So how can I enable engineering teams to do their job or take their responsibilities very well without worrying about the amount of time that they have to spend on the learning? What if I take that learning curve completely out of them? How can I make it easy for them to just uh, you know uh, complete deployment, for example, simply? Can they write just 10 lines of YAML code to deploy something quickly? Yes. If yes, then I think we achieve the one goal of shared responsibility model, which is make it simple for engineering teams.
So it seems like a lot of the newer tools and stuff that you can use have made it a little bit easier, right? Because it's removed some of the complexity. So going back to containers and then like Helm and other stuff. Like it just makes it so much easier than giving someone a VM and saying go deploy. So you think that, like, what is that what you would say to your younger self on the DevOps SRE team is, hey, software engineering is the most important for you right now. That's your customer. You got to make them happy, make it easy for them, right? Like, because when they do a great job, it's going to be great for your team too, right?
Right. So that was the tools really help here, and there are many tools on the market. Trying DevOps tools. I'm talking about the infrastructure tooling and the processes also. Trying to solve this problem unique way, and they are really great tools. And I don't want to get into tools discussion really depth because it means whole new episode for that.
We'll be here for a couple hours.
Yeah, so I think I can sum it up. What success criteria is. I think let's start there and then go to example. The shared responsibility model success criteria is the first thing, which is most neglected in my opinion, is a learning curve for both the teams, not only engineering teams but the DevOps SRE teams as well. The introduction of new tools and what kind of learning curve that we are adding, right? All of that also that matters. Ability to quickly troubleshooting and fixing problems on the both side. How easy it is for engineering teams to solve some production issue which is happening with their application and they are responsible for. If that is easy, that means success criteria is passed. Autonomy. How easy it is for engineering teams to have the customizations done. Is it difficult? What it takes for them? Do they have to spend a lot of time on it? And how that process goes. If it is easy and they have full autonomy, they feel full autonomy, then I think that is another success criteria. The solution flexibility. Are they keeping everything dry? Are they able to keep everything dry? Do not repeat yourself, of course, and manage the environments. Deploy the same stuff to staging environment, test environment, and then take it to the production, where they're able to easily achieve the dry principles, and while maintaining the guardrails that SRE teams and DevOps teams set. So that is also very important success criteria to measure the success of shared responsibility model. And then last two, one I say, the other one is the ultra fast support system. How quickly they get the support? Is it easy enough, or they are just literally creating Jira tickets and waiting on it for 2 days? So that is also considered, should be considered as a success criteria.
It's creating a Jira ticket, asking a message in Slack, and then even sending an email sometimes, right? Like,
yeah, usually that happens. People send a message in Slack. The funny thing is, send a message in Slack. You'll be asked to, hey, go create Jira ticket. Then you create Jira ticket. Nobody responds. Then you have to come back to Slack and say, hey, I created Jira ticket. Nobody's responding. And then response is, oh, we are busy right now. That is not success. That is a failure of shared responsibility model. So how do we make it easier? Because the engineering team is going to get quickly disappointed by the support system. So we want to make sure they are unblocked and it is easy.
What happens when that happens? I know you got another more criteria, but what happens when that happens? Do you think developers are less trusting and try to do their own environments or something like that, or like they try to stand up something else and test? All right, so they're not using.
They immediately will pick up that as a challenge, and they will do what they usually do. They will take their matters in their own hands.
I'll write my own library. That's the developer's first response.
Yeah, that's right. So, and we don't want to let that happen, because that would be definitely a failure for shared responsibility model. And if you think from organization's perspective, now we are actually adding more cost because engineering team wants to have their own infrastructure because they don't have trust, or they are not having the necessary. So these are the results of not having successful shared responsibility model here, right? And the last piece of the success criteria is, I think, the compliance and control. Documentation is also there, but the compliance and control is more important. Security team is going to constantly worry about how I'm going to scan and make everyone fix the security issues before it happens. So zero trust is very famous now. Of course, security teams want to make sure everything is secure, and it's very tough job for them.
So we've got the shared triangle of responsibility going now to where we can build some graphs. We start putting things in each side. But it sounds like a lot of the work is on the DevOps SRE team, right? Like to define a lot of things and make it easier for the other teams. So like I guess you kind of want to start there if you really want to get this working and get everybody on board on that team. Be like, hey, this will make your lives easier. It's going to take some work. We got to define some stuff. We got to make it easier for them. Going into that, like, what have you run into any issues by having like a mixed team? So say you've got a team, like instead of having like a triangle where people send stuff around, you've got a matrix, right? Like you've got a team of, software developers and SREs and DevOps all in the same group. Like, what happens with that? Is that kind of not the best way to do it, or?
I think that is one way of doing it. It totally depends on company to company, right? How big organization is and how diverse engineering teams are. Yeah, sometimes it is far difficult to get everyone in the same room, so you might have to do one at a time. Focus on one team, make a good example of it, make the whole experience much easier, and set that as an example, and then replicate everywhere. I think that would be the best approach in that case.
So I say you kind of get pushed into a thing where, like, when you were on the software engineering team, you kind of became their point of contact, and then they just all went through you basically to get to access and talk to the SRE DevOps team, and then that kind of creates like a bottleneck to where you're not really communicating at that point. They're just relying on you.
Yeah, I have seen that happening, and it's pretty common. So I think it all comes down to how you handle it. The first thing that comes to my mind is I always respond, no matter what, how busy I am. I always respond and make sure they are taken care of. So if they are not following a particular process, which is already said, hey, you need to send that message to a Slack channel, and that message come to me, I never say no to that. I just take that message and forward it to the person and make sure, because their satisfaction is most important thing. So
Yeah.
and then work towards, how can I make that individual understand, what is the quickest way to do it. So I kind of start with some hinting, which most of the people pick it automatically, and they understand, and they do it, and they come to me only when they see a problem, and because they believe that I can solve a problem for them, which is the great feeling that I want to have, that okay, people are coming to me because they have problem and they think that I can solve them. So yeah, that is my motivation.
So you're telling me you got to start with teaching soft skills, because not everything is going to be by the book, right? Like sometimes you do need to make exceptions, right? Without it becoming overwhelming, right? Like not everybody can come to you. Like that's not going to scale, but there's always room for, like, if this person's a deadline, you really got to get it done, and it's very important, right? Like that kind of stuff without going too far.
Definitely. It is part of the job. Because winning customers is, of course, you have to contribute multiple ways, and all of these contributions, I think, contributions towards making the work culture better. So it's infectious. If you behave in certain way, it is contagious. People start behaving, exactly similar way, and that creates the positive environment. So I always stay up for that, and then just don't um, you know I expect from myself that no matter how busy I am, always respond. If any communication comes
Yeah.
your way, be very attentive and respond immediately.
I agree with that too. Like, just like from working on a lot of different support teams and stuff like that and having different groups, it's helpful too to put like a face with a name for some of these things, right? Like if it's just someone always like coming at you, like asking something, like you're like, oh, this person all the time coming at me. But like if you have some interaction between the teams to where they understand each other and they see each other, and it's not just this random name, it's this person with a face and a personality, and it's a person, like that kind of helps too, I think, between the two teams, right? Like I think that goes across any team where it's like shared responsibility. Like if you know the person, maybe you've got a little bit better of an interaction with
Yes.
them.
That's why relationships are really, really important, and that is something I try to build early on. If I'm new, that is the first thing that I start doing, and I identify stakeholders and start talking to them, develop those relationships early on, and then you will see the benefit of those relationships, into great work and collaborative efforts, coming out of it. So it goes a long way.
All right, so move on to the next question. So, engineering teams resisting a little bit. Like, so how do you get them to give away the keys to the kingdom, right? Like, what advice would you give? Like, I guess that's a big thing is over the last like 15, 20 years, like before containers and that kind of stuff, like they controlled everything, right? Like, and if something breaks, they kind of go in, they fix it. They're deploying things, right? Like they've seen things go into like staging. Now they're deploying it maybe like 10, 15 years ago, like before containers really. Now they're saying, hey, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to troubleshoot stuff when it's like breaking and fix that. How do you get them to move to that? That's because that's giving up a lot.
Yeah, that is a very difficult discussion. Uh, okay, here's how I want to talk about that particular challenge. That challenge every company is going to have. Usually companies, startups, they become a little bigger, and then when companies are startup, you will see engineering teams doing everything. Then you will start seeing the IT teams coming on board, security team, and they are now facing those challenges. How do we achieve our goals? Because they have goals um, to control security, make sure everything is secure. But making tiny changes is relying a lot on engineering teams, which is not a priority for them. And then that's where the sense starts. Okay, hey, I think we need to start owning the keys to the kingdom and take that access from engineering teams. So that's the beginning of the chaos, or I would say the struggle, the fights between these central teams and the engineering teams, and engineering teams resist a lot because um, they fear that if they let go the control, it would be far difficult for them to make changes to what they care most. Deploying something, for example, and it will be left to they will be left to creating Jira tickets and waiting on other teams to do it. So I think that is most common reason why they want to resist. And there are multiple ways how you can actually try and break that resistance and make it go for the share. And I think shared responsibility model is about that, making sure there is no resistance required in such cases. We should be working together as a team and still be able to do that. And I think with the right set of tools, a successful shared responsibility model, it can be achieved no matter what organization size.
That's an interesting way of putting it too. I don't really think about that. Like, yeah, like if you're in a startup and there's like 5 of you or 10 of you, you've probably got like a couple of software developers and they're doing
Mhm.
everything. They're doing everything locally because it's all testing, right? Like I'm just testing this idea. I'm going to do this. So we'll stand up, a server on AWS or something like that, or a Kubernetes cluster, and we'll start deploying it and stuff like that. And then you start hiring in the DevOps engineers who are part of the software dev group at first, and then they branch off. And then it's like, oh, now I got to take this all away from you, right? So it's interesting to think about software engineers actually doing all that work to begin with, and then having to give up access to that instead of it being reversed, where it's the DevOps SRE teams giving up the keys of the kingdom.
Yes, and that's a fun journey, to be honest. And you get to learn a lot of things. You learn about literally everything. You learn about the how to keep yourself calm and stay at it, focus on the goal, and do certain things certain way, and stay positive all the time. And no matter what, the goal is to actually make sure everybody's having trust on the ability of teams to actually handle that particular thing for them really well. So I think it all starts, and I can talk about some of the things that are really important. um, One thing particularly I want to talk about is the bias for action. um, Making things, you have to do everything fast. You have to go fast, and what it means is, when you identify a problem which would contribute to the resistance of getting something done, and removing the access from engineering teams may not be the actual goal. The goal of removing access is to establish security, because we cannot have security. So the first thing that I do is the bias for action. Think fast and go for those, identify those opportunities quickly where a problem is going to contribute to the resistance, and work on it right away, and talk to the stakeholders before they start developing their own solutions, because they are engineers. They're going to see the problem, and they're going to come up with their own ways to solve that problem, to make sure that they don't have to give up the access. So the taking the access is not for having the control. Taking the access is for the security reasons. We cannot have. In fact, I would say DevOps and SRE teams also should not have any access. They
You say
should not
security.
require.
security
it could
and the
be,
ability to focus on what they need to focus on instead of having all this
yes,
extra stuff, right? Like they can start
yes,
just writing code all the time and like doing that kind of stuff instead of worrying about like, oh, is the cluster running?
yes. Right. So to avoiding conflicts is the reason why I want to talk a little bit about that is, um, once engineers, spend some time on it, then they want to stand by it. And that's where your job becomes even more difficult. And that's why bias for action is very important. You have to act fast. Um, and once you manage to latch on those opportunities and quickly put solution and give them that confidence that, hey, this is being taken care this particular way, then it's all about how much confidence you can build in them, about the capabilities of the team, who is going to support that, and their trust on you, of course. Once that happens, then it's easier path, of course.
That's a good point. Like they have a bad experience with the DevOps person that comes in once and I'm not gonna be able to do this. So building a
Yeah,
little bit of trust is very important.
very important. Another thing is, I think, the building relationship with your champions. Of course, it's part of that. I talked about that. And do more, tell less. If you talk a lot about the vision and stuff, it's just not gonna fly with engineers. No, I have
They,
learned that the hard way.
they want to see
It
work
doesn't
or
work.
actionable items and stuff like that.
Yes. So I talk less nowadays and do more. So doing more, they are interested to see what you did, and that's your opening, that's your opportunity to let them see what you have done and then give you the feedback. Listen to them, because they're gonna see and be critical about everything, because they are the one, they have that fear of they're gonna lose the access. They want to be double sure that if they let go, they're gonna have that the comfort that they still need. So showing them what your solution is or architecture is, and showing them something working, I think goes a long way. They would probably look at that, see how it is, and be comfortable with it. If they see problem, there you go. You have your feedback, and you go back and with the solution and say, hey, and find that common ground where they are comfortable with it. And I think at least once, it has to happen at least once. If it happens once, then you'll probably have very much easier and simple path to get them to agree and not have any resistance on getting those goals achieved, when it comes to the access levels and stuff.
That makes sense. Hey, if anybody that's watching has any questions for Satish, go ahead and post them and we'll ask them. But let's go ahead and move on to, I guess, do you have any other stories you want to talk about? We've got a couple more minutes here to talk. Do you have any other stories from situations where maybe you like tried to get this started and they were like, no, we're not going to do this. This isn't going to work for us. We're just going to keep what we have.
I think we talked a lot about I think we barely scratched the surface here, when it comes to shared resource model. There is a lot more. And I'm sure whatever we talk today probably not satisfy our technical viewers much, because we are not talking about tools or anything. Maybe we could go for another episode at some point and talk a little bit more about the tooling. That will be much more relevant to them as well, because but this is also important. This discussion was important. We need to understand and know the background, why this is important, and then it makes sense to talk about the tooling. The one particular thing I would be interested to talk about later is the learning curve. It is the most neglected thing, and the way we make choices of our technologies. So choices of technologies, usually what happens is based on um, what best tool is out there, but nobody thinks the learning curve. Learning curve is also important. So choice of tooling should be based on learning curve, and I think this would be a really good discussion topic for the next episode.
All right. So what are my takeaways? That if I want to get started with this, I need some success criteria. I need to find the stakeholders. I need to start
Yeah.
talking to different teams and introducing them. So what other things would you add? Like what do I take away from this and how do I get started?
I think engage at all levels, both directions. That is something I like, because staying on the ground gives you a lot of visibility and understanding of what problems are going. So engaging at all levels with in all those teams is a really really important thing for success of shared responsibility model. So I would add that to the list, definitely. And and yeah, and the rest of the things that I already talked about, I'm just looking at my notes right now. I think I talked pretty much about everything. Bias for action, I would highly recommend. You have to match the speed, the way engineers think. You have to at least match or go way beyond that. You have to figure it out a way. You have to act fast with solutioning and win them over before they build something. Because once they see the problem, they're gonna think about it. They're gonna come up with their own thought process, and you don't wanna lose that opportunity to pitch in and give your ideas so that they will think over and accept and understand what the challenges are, and then agree to it.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you want to add outside of what we've already talked about, or anything you want to talk about as an end to this before I do our outro and say goodbye?
I guess it is good enough for today. I would love to do another episode talking about the tools. That is something I think would be very valuable. And yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, awesome. So
Thank you
say
for having
thanks.
me.
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. We spent some time getting ready for this. We're super excited to talk about it. Hopefully, some of the information was useful, and it makes you think about things a little bit differently. It definitely helped me a little bit, like thinking about like the startup stuff. I wasn't thinking about that, like how it's the engineer, the developers that have to give up access eventually, not always the other way around. But say if you missed anything today, you can watch a replay on LinkedIn or YouTube, or you can listen to it on Spotify or any of the other podcast platforms. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Can't wait to see everybody then. Thanks so much, Satish. Thanks everybody for
Thanks
joining.
for
I hope
having
everyone
me.
had a